Hear that? That's the sound of your car's NCT getting closer. But this year, why not rely on an Avantcard loan rather than luck? If it's time to upgrade your car to something newer, it's time you contacted Avantcard. Avantcard offers loans from €5,000 to €75,000, approval in principle in minutes, and personalised pricing made for you.
Find out more at avantcard.ie. Lending criteria, terms and conditions apply. Avantcard DAC trading as Avantcard is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Welcome back to the Sportsmemo Betting Podcast and the Saturday Look-Ahead College Basketball Podcast with Robbie Veno. Rob, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I am good today, Drew. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. This is my favorite podcast of the week, talking the Saturday games with you. You're hitting 59% and 58% in NBA and college basketball full season on every play you've released. So it's been a great basketball season for you. What are you seeing out there in the basketball markets that you want to get off your chest?
Yeah, well, whatever I'm seeing, I hope I see it the same way the rest of the season, Drew. But actually, I kind of like college football handicap in thirds or even in quarters for the college basketball season. So far to date, the early non-conference stuff I saw pretty well. Then the early conference stuff. Now we're getting into mid to season-ending conference stuff within the next few days, which kind of changed the handicap for me a little bit. So we'll be still looking at the same things, but looking at them from a different perspective from what's worked over the years. And then, of course, postseason tournament action, obviously totally different. Conference tournament action, totally different. But, yeah, right now, Drew, everything the criteria that I use to come across selections has been good as gold. So far this year, I mean, it's 58 and 59%. And those who follow me and, guys who work with me like yourself, I'm not real chintzy when it comes to dishing out client plays. So when you've got a high volume approach and you're on the borderline of 60% in both ends of basketball, that's a pretty successful season.
Yeah, good stuff, Robbie. And we got a bunch of questions on Twitter that about games guys asking to cover, so we'll hit on as many as we can and try to get the listeners on some of these right sides. We got Horace asking Big 12 versus SEC. Obviously, the SEC Big 12 Challenge is this weekend, so a lot of kind of interconference games on Saturday's slate. So we'll hit those. That's from Horace, and we also got at MJ_9 asking Michigan at Indiana tonight, Buffalo at Kent State. Robbie, just anything real quick on tonight's games? Either of those two games, Michigan, Indiana, Buffalo at Kent State.
Well, I think they're both important for sure from this angle. Certainly Michigan, Drew, we had them on our podcast the other day. They had another poor offensive performance, and right now John Beilein's team kind of against the wall here where they're searching for some answers offensively, and they're not searching for any more answers than Archie Miller's Indiana team is. That's a team that's been in a funk since conference season began. We see the total tick up a little bit here. Michigan, I think, priced in the right range. I showed them power rating wise to be -3. To me, this game, Michigan on the road, defense travels. I think they'll come up a winner here, but I wouldn't play the game just because there's a desperation factor, and it's kind of funny to say desperation with Michigan. Certainly you could apply it to Indiana, but I do think there's a desperation factor to both of these teams in this game. I think you're going to see 40 minutes of rugged Big Ten basketball, and in that case, a single bounce, a single three-pointer could certainly decide the outcome of the game. So it's a very tough game to handicap here. I'd rather wait and see the result of this game and maybe apply that to their next conference outing. Buffalo-Kent State, we know Buffalo surprisingly loses the other night. It seemed as if they were just going to march right through the MAC conference schedule. But Buffalo comes off a loss here, so certainly they'll be refocused. Sometimes for teams like Buffalo, Nevada, these mid-majors that are marching right through their league schedule, Gonzaga, and folks will say that there's really no resume-building games left on their schedule, which is very true. And sometimes it's hard to keep that focus all the way through. Buffalo lost a little focus the other night. I think they'll bounce back here, but that being said, for those who pay attention to the MAC, that Kent's been on a bit of a roll lately. Kent's a funny team, but at the current point in time, this Kent State squad is playing rather well. That's why we don't see very much movement toward the Buffalo side in this game, but rather we saw it towards Kent. Open 9, went down to 8. We see some 8.5s now, but you would think off a loss you would catch a little bit more Buffalo money, but not in this instance because Kent at home and Kent playing pretty good basketball right now.
Robbie, let's get into some of these Saturday games, and we'll hit some more Twitter questions as well. We got 609, 610, part of the Big 12 SEC Challenge. Florida traveling to the state of Texas to take on TCU. And going by Ken Palm's numbers here, he's got 63-67 favoring TCU, so that would put a -4 for the Horned Frogs, total of 130. Obviously, that might not be the spread that comes out here, but we're talking before the numbers are out. So going off of TCU -4 and a total of 130, how would you look to bet the Gators and Horned Frogs Saturday?
Yeah, and I would say jokingly, Ken Palm is probably correct because my power ratings say that TCU should be 4. So very good job, Ken Palm. We're in alliance there with the number. I think that's probably where it will come, Drew. For Florida, for all of these teams now, you go out of conference to where you don't know your opponent as well. In the case of Florida, you're off an embarrassing game against Texas A&M the other night. So there's certainly some redemption factor to be thrown into the handicap here for the Florida Gators side for TCU. They get Kwatnoi back in that game. You and I talked about that game on the podcast. We had a look ahead to the TCU-Texas game. And TCU, depending upon where you got that number, you could have won both sides. You could have won Texas early with the big price, and then it was bet way down. I think it was bet from like 5 down to 1.5, and then ended up closing around 2.5, in which case you win with TCU because they won that game by, I think, 4 points. Jamie Dixon's team ran into a real good Shaka Smart defense. They're going to see a real good Florida defense here, so much the same. But like I said earlier, it's a little difficult to project how these teams will react simply because they don't know the opposition very well. When you step out of conference like this, you'll remember, Drew, a few years back when we used to have Bracket Busters, which was a great Saturday. 40 mid-major games, 50 mid-major games, all combined conferences. It's somewhat like that where you step out, you wonder what team mindsets will be, that it's not a conference game. The good news about the SEC and the Big 12 Challenge is that, generally speaking, in these games, you get an opponent that could raise some eyebrows if you defeat them. I mean, there's a couple instances where the opponent isn't great and winning doesn't do you any good as far as resume building is concerned. But for the most part, a Florida victory on the road at TCU would count pretty highly. A TCU home victory over Florida would count pretty highly. So I think you'll get effort here. I like the TCU squad. I think they're a better offensive team. But at this point in time, not willing to lay 4 points just because I would expect Florida, Michael White's team, to bounce back pretty strong off of, like I say, what was not a real good go of it the other night against Texas A&M.
Yeah, Robbie, and we got some other Big 12 SEC games that we're going to be breaking down as part of this challenge. And I also wanted to throw out a stat here, Robbie. We were talking before camera. You're 25-2 the last 6 times before a podcast. What's to that? Is it just randomness or preparing for the podcast? What do you think's to that number?
Yeah, that's one of those ridiculous trends that we find in any sport, Drew. But for us, and I know I brought it to your attention about 3 shows ago, it just seemed kind of weird. The night before or the day before preceding a podcast with the two of us, my plays would go undefeated, and it started to build all the way to the point where it was 20-0 after Monday, and then last night we threw a 5-2 up there. We finally caught a loss. It actually had ran, if you just go chronologically, it had run its way to 25-0 time-wise before the first one went down finally. So however you're doing the scheduling of the podcast, you're doing a great job because the night before, I can almost assure that we're going to have a good night at this point in time. It's been, like you say, over the course of the last 6 podcasts. So not just one, but it's been running for a while now.
All right. So, guys, look out for next Monday or Tuesday. You might get both of them here because we're not going to have a podcast next Wednesday. I'll be traveling. But next Tuesday, later in the day, we're going to have a look ahead to Wednesday's college basketball card, and that's when Robbie will be on. So make sure to check out sportsmemo.com next Tuesday for Robbie's plays, because it's a good streak, Robbie, when you go 5-2, and that hurts your percentage on the streak. That's how you know it's a good one.
Yeah, no, that's for sure, Drew. I mean, it was the word I guess they use nowadays is non-sustainable. But to think that we were going to go undefeated before every podcast throughout the remainder of the basketball season was kind of far-fetched. But it has been really, really good. And I don't even know what that number is, but 25-2 is incredible, Mark.
Yeah, well, good stuff, Robbie. And guys, if you're interested in Rob Veno's college basketball or NBA season, we're actually doing a special podcast here for the rest of the season, which is priced at $850 for every play in the NBA and college basketball from Robbie Veno. No extra charges later. Gets you all the way through the both championship games in both sports, in basketball, NBA, and college basketball. And that coupon code is Veno. 399. That will give you the rest of his NBA and college basketball for just $400 there, $399. So Veno 399 at checkout for the rest of his NBA and college basketball season. Let's get back to this Big 12 SEC challenge here, Robbie. 665-666. Vandy at Oklahoma. This might be one of those matchups where it's not really going to build a lot for Oklahoma beating Vanderbilt on the road, although it might. We're seeing 65-77 from Ken Palm. So that would put Oklahoma as a 12-point home favorite, 142 the total. What are your numbers posted on this, Robbie?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, Drew. Like you say, because as we talked about with mindset, you wonder how OU will come into this game, especially after, just playing Oklahoma State. That's in state-wise, that's their biggest game of the season as far as rival is concerned. So we'll see. Now, I made the game Oklahoma minus 10.5, so I'm a little lighter on the number than is Ken Palm. We'll see where it opens, maybe somewhere right in between. A lot of these games, the situationals have to be applied when you handicap, like we're talking about mindset and stuff like that. I'm basically a fundamental handicapper first, situational second, and the technical stuff, unless it's really, really something that catches my eye, I don't apply many trends, so to speak, to my handicap. But in this one, Oklahoma's clearly the better team personnel-wise. However, Vanderbilt, and I just talked about Oklahoma maybe because of their game against Oklahoma State, having a little bit of a letdown here because of their opponent. Well, for Vandy, they just pushed Tennessee to overtime in a game that they could have won in regulation, maybe should have won in regulation because they had the lead very, very late in that contest. I mean, how will Vandy react to travel off of that disappointing loss, a game that they had and let get away in OT? So both teams actually coming from similar situational spots here, the difference being Oklahoma, after getting behind big early, came back and won their contest much the way Florida did against A&M the other night. Florida, gets behind big to A&M and then comes back and wins but doesn't cover the number. Oklahoma did cover the number. I think, in this price range, it's better probably to go ahead and check and see what the total is in this contest. I would be more apt to play total than side in this game. I think it could be a very free-flowing contest here. And even if both teams are somewhat I don't want to call them lackadaisical, Drew, but I will say without the same intensity that they had a few nights ago, I think they'll probably still show here because of the nature and the hype surrounding this particular SEC Big 12 challenge. So maybe you get some points out of it. We'll see where the total is established here, but I would rather look that way than look at the game as from a side perspective.
All right, Robbie, we got 675-676 West Virginia at Tennessee up next. This is another one. It's going to be tough for Tennessee to kind of bolster the resume, but like you just touched on against Vanderbilt, they were pushed to the brink, so could see it again here. 86-68 is what KP has it, so that would put Tennessee, the Volunteers, 18-point favorites and 154 total. What are you thinking about Mountaineers, Volunteers here?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right with Tennessee not having a lot to gain from this game. And I also wonder, Drew, in fact, before I get into it, let's just start with the fact that the power ratings make the game Tennessee minus 16. So, again, a shade lighter than what Ken Pom is. For Tennessee, it wasn't just the Vanderbilt game where they were pushed to overtime and needed, a lot of help in order to not only get that game to regulation, then once they got it there to win the game straight up. But the game before against Alabama, they were on the ropes too. Alabama, John Petty had a terrific game in that contest, and Tennessee had to come from behind. And I think they used if I'm remembering right, it was like a 13-4 spurt at the end of that game within the last 3 minutes to go ahead and finally win. But they've been up against it after absolutely mowing down the competition in the SEC. They've been up against it the last 2 games against teams that they were sizable favorites to beat, didn't get the job done either way. And I wonder if, this Tennessee team, like we said a little bit about Michigan earlier, isn't just hitting somewhat of a wall right now. Tennessee's been through a real good schedule, non-conference-wise, conference-wise, and to ask them to go ahead and keep covering these huge double-digit numbers might be a little much. Now, saying that, would kind of lead you to playing the underdog, West Virginia here, who's had a miserable season for Bob Huggins. In fact, at least as we stack it up against West Virginia's standards over recent memory, as far as my power ratings are concerned, they're rated the second worst team in the Big 12 right now. Big 12, great conference, so no shame being second to last, but they're not used to being second to last inside that league. They've done a real good job, Drew, inside the Big 12 as an underdog, though, which is where I'm trying to lead this analysis to. They're 4-1 against the spread as an underdog. They're not winning a lot of games straight up, but they're covering a lot of games. They're 2-1 as a road dog inside the Big 12. They're 2-0 as a home dog inside the Big 12. And here they're going to catch anywhere from, if you're looking at my numbers, you think you're going to catch 16. If you're looking at Ken Pom's numbers, you think you're going to catch 18.5, which is even better. I just, a knee-jerk reaction would be Rick Barnes' team needs to bounce back and have a real superior effort here. But when I factor in that it's a non-conference game, it's against one of the weaker Big 12 opponents, and Tennessee might just be running on fumes right now, having to come from behind and play as hard as they did just to get wins the last 2 times, and West Virginia being a real good underdog right now. I think taking the points, and this many points, is the way to go here. Bob Huggins, for what it's worth, in those games that I mentioned, Big 12 games, they've only lost one of them by more than 12. I think 5 of their Big 12 decisions have been one way or the other by 8 or less, 1 loss by 12, 1 complete blowout loss to TCU by 31. So they've been pretty competitive despite the bad straight-up record. I think West Virginia plus the huge amount of points might be worth a look.
Yeah, I like your breakdown there, Robbie, because at first I was just looking Tennessee or nothing, but you're right. After breaking it down, and plus, this Big 12 SEC challenge, Brent and I talked about it. As far as just handicapping, I guess, philosophy with these games, it's just a one-time thing where you're not recruiting for this opponent, for this matchup. You're not really preparing. You don't have a lot to prepare for anyway, as far as seeing these teams multiple times a year or anything like that. So as far as just a 1-2 day prep time for your opponent, West Virginia is a tougher one to prepare for. So you have that in your back pocket as well, Robbie.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, we know that, Bob Huggins has, he publicly stated it a month ago, more than a month ago, that this group of kids just cannot play his frantic style the way previous groups, and especially the most recent group led by point guard Javon Carter, have been able to play it. So he's had to mold and do some things here, but just the fact, and obviously we're way more involved with against the spread numbers than we are straight up numbers, just the fact that they've played so well as an underdog in a very, very good conference lets you know that what he's doing here during conference season is having some positive effect. There's so much more to gain here for West Virginia by performing well. And by gain, I don't mean an NCAA bid, but I do mean confidence-wise with this group. There's a lot to gain if you go to Knoxville and play extremely competitive. So to me, a lot more factors line up with West Virginia than do with Tennessee in this game. Tennessee could walk out on the floor, Drew, because they're the better team personnel-wise, and they could win by 20+. There's no doubt about it. But, this idea of betting games is all about putting yourself in the best position to win, and I think the best position to win here would be on the West Virginia side plus that load of points.
And Robbie, let's hit the Twitter questions again. Brandon Boyd on Twitter asked about, I guess he's living there near St. Louis, wanted to know about the Missouri team. Looks like Missouri's hosting LSU this weekend. Should be a pretty tight line. This is an interesting matchup. Anything on, and I know you know the Missouri program very well. I believe your son just graduated there, now working at ESPN, so congrats to you on that. But anything on LSU, Missouri?
Yeah, and first of all, Brandon's the one guy on Twitter. We'll give him a quick shout out here because if ever I give him an M-I-Z, he knows to reply with the Z-O-U. Just like if you were walking through the grocery, Drew, you'd get a War Eagle back, right? It's the same thing.
Okay, cool.
And he's Missouri through and through, so he likes to know about the program. And, LSU tomorrow, Mizzou gets beat by Arkansas the other night. They had an early lead, but again, offense fails them, and they're really limited in offensive options on this team. In some respects, when Jordan Geist becomes like your number 2 option on offense, it's difficult. I wish Jeremiah Tillman could stay on the floor more. He seemingly is always in foul trouble, but they've gotten some decent help in the three-point category. I mean, this team actually lives off of three-point shooting as the firm basis of its offense. Against LSU, now that Tremont Waters is coming to town, boy, oh boy, you have to look out. It's going to be a battle of wills, in my estimation, because obviously LSU with Will Wade, you'll remember Will Wade was an assistant to Shaka Smart at VCU, so similar styles. Will Wade has sort of modified the style as to his own liking as a head coach here at LSU, but boy, they love pace, and Konzo Martin does not love pace. He knows that the only way to win with this group that he has this year is to slow the game down, muck it up, try and keep it in the low 60s. I just don't know that they're going to be successful. It kind of reminds me of the game a couple of weeks ago, played in the Hearn Center when Tennessee came to town, and boy, the crowd gets Mizzou going early, and eventually the talent shows up. And for Tennessee, it didn't take more than, the second 10 minutes of the first half before the talent showed up. It may be the case here with LSU. I think, Mizzou's going to be in for a lot of these nights and days inside the SEC this year. All that being said, Drew, I don't know what Ken Palm's numbers show, but I show LSU only as a 4-point favorite in this game. If they come at -4, I'd likely be involved on the LSU side. I'd be interested to see where the total comes because my opinion of that game is LSU will be able to speed Missouri up, maybe even get out in front enough to where Mizzou has to play catch-up. So a couple of things that I'll be looking at in that game, maybe the visiting side if the price is cheap enough, and also the total if that price is cheap enough.
So if we got a total of, let's just say, 141, would you bet that over?
Yeah, I think I would, Drew. I think LSU is probably ticketed, and because watching them enough, you just can't slow these guys down. And Waters, give Geist a lot of credit. He's as hard a worker, and he's been as hard a worker as there is on that Missouri team. But he is going to have his hands full with Waters tomorrow. And one thing, after watching Jordan Geist for as long as I've seen him now, like you say, my son was recently graduated from this, so I've seen enough of Jordan Geist, but he can get frustrated into turnovers. He can get sped up by really quick guards. So I think a lot of that will happen tomorrow. I think 141 would be a good price for me to get involved. The reason why Mizzou couldn't go over the number the other night is because, like themselves, Arkansas really is not a good offensive team. LSU's going to score against anybody they play. So we'll see. Hopefully that number does come 141. If it does, I'll likely be involved.
All right, Robbie, good stuff. We got one more game left, and guys, if you're liking the breakdowns, make sure to check out Robbie's full NBA and college basketball season. Normally $850 with the coupon code from this podcast, Veno399. you'll get it. You'll get it all through the NBA Finals, through the college basketball Final Four championship game for just $399. It's a huge discount, more than half off, more than 50% off here. Veno $399 at checkout for the rest of the NBA and college basketball season. Robbie, last game up here, 619-620. Texas at Georgia, part of the Big 12 SEC Challenge here. Seeing numbers, Texas 70, Georgia 65, making the Longhorns 5-point favorites with a 135 total. How do you see the Longhorns and Bulldogs?
Yeah, bigger than I made the number, Drew. My power rating showed Texas -2.5, giving Georgia a little bit more respect than what they're getting out of the Ken Pom numbers. And if you just use your eyes as to what's happened recently, you probably wouldn't give Georgia that much respect either. That's why, I use power ratings, because it's never the be-all, end-all reason why I go to get a ticket on a certain team. I don't see a power rating number and run and make a bet. But it's that grounding factor so that your eyes don't lie to you. There's always got to be some sort of unbiased place to start the handicap, and the power ratings, the numbers are unbiased, and that way I can take a look and see if there's some intrigue into going deeper into the game. But if Texas does come -5, it's a difficult play. I think 2.5 would be a number where you could get involved with Texas. 5, a little more difficult. Maybe you still could. We'll have to see. The defensive intensity that Shaka Smart's team will bring to a turnover-prone and very young Georgia Bulldog team could be a big enough difference in itself to cover 5 points. Assuming that Texas comes to Georgia and is fully focused to play off of the game the other night where they played TCU, like we talked about earlier. That was a intense struggle for 40 minutes. TCU got out of there alive with the 4-point victory. Could be a good bounce-back spot for Texas. Not a lot to gain by beating Georgia, one of the bottom feeder teams in the SEC here. So I can't find a lot of reason, unless I was getting a substantial amount of points, to go ahead and back the Georgia Bulldogs right now from a fundamental perspective, because I think they're going to have a hard time matching up. Just the styles, to me, dictate Georgia turnovers that lead to Texas points in this contest. Texas, we saw the other night that a lot of times they can become very one-dimensional offensively, so hopefully they work the bigs inside to help out a little bit here. I think they can. Once again, Georgia's youth might get in the way. Tom Crean stepped into a situation here at Georgia where he's going to be successful down the road, but the group that he was handed this year, just like I say, very youthful, very turnover prone, and that's just not a good mix against a Shaka Smart-led team, especially one as veteran as Texas.
Robbie, great stuff. As always, 59% and 58% in the NBA and college basketball. Full season, that's year-to-date numbers, guys. Every play released. 25-2 before the podcast, day before. Kind of a wild stat here. But he'll be on the podcast for Wednesday's look-ahead show next week. So keep that in mind, guys. Robbie, anything else you want to throw out there? Big Saturday card, Sunday. What do you got on tap for this weekend?
Yeah, it's funny because you and I were talking off air before we started the podcast, Drew, and I told you I'll probably be watching the Senior Bowl for a good portion of the day because I love the draft stuff. And for, once again, quick shout to Brandon in St. Louis. Let's keep our eyes on Drew Lock and see how he fares quarterbacking John Gruden's team tomorrow. But my eyes will be everywhere. They always are. And at this point in time, Drew, I'm also involved in trying somehow, some way to make a very educated, accurate assessment where power ratings are concerned for the American Alliance of Football, which will begin on February 9th. The new league is not that far away, guys. The week after the Super Bowl, we got new football to bet on. Be interested to see where these numbers fall, but I've been in about a 2-week process now of studying rosters and notes on the league and trying to put together the most informed power ratings I can. So that'll probably eat up a bit of the weekend as well.
Wow, that's interesting right there, the American Alliance of Football. And they are going to be posting numbers on offshore and in Vegas, or?
Let's hope so, right, Drew? I haven't seen any definitive word yet. I know the job's got to be difficult for bookmakers to go ahead and try and establish numbers on this league without really knowing anything about how they're going to or the uniqueness of each team's situation. You can base your a lot of your stuff off of your head coaches here. For those who don't know, there's a lot of big names in this league. For instance, right there, in Florida,
Vick, right?
Drew. Michael Vick is an offensive coordinator in this league. Steve Spurrier is a head coach in this league. Steve Spurrier actually has already been quoted as saying he thinks his offense is mid-season ready. So you can they don't call it fun and gun like they did when he was with the Florida Gators, but they're referring to this one as Sun and Gun because he's the head coach of the Orlando team. And then, of course, you have Mike Martz, the master of the greatest show on turf with the LA Rams, running the San Diego franchise out west. So a lot of big-name coaches, a lot of research. I've dug into this, and, we'll never know until they take the field. But you like to put yourself, like I said earlier, in the best position to win. And I'll get the numbers up. I'll make them available to everybody once I get them there, and we'll see if we can't come away with a few winners early in that league.
Cool. Great stuff, Robbie. Guys, coupon code VENO, $3.99 at checkout for the rest of his NBA college basketball season. Gives you the rest of his both seasons for just $399. Thanks for the time, Robbie. Best of luck with your bets this weekend. Best of luck with everyone's bets out there. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back Monday with College Basketball Betting Podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
Lisa likes the window seat at night. The lights below that tell her she's nearly home. Then there's the lights she can't see. The runway lights we power to bring her plane safely into land. And because at Energia we also power all of Ireland's streetlights, Lisa's taxi home is that bit safer too. And no prizes for guessing who powers her house. Welcome home, Lisa. Energia, the power behind your power.
Hear that? That's the sound of your car's NCT getting closer. But this year, why not rely on an Avantcard loan rather than luck? If it's time to upgrade your car to something newer, it's time you contacted Avantcard. Avantcard offers loans from €5,000 to €75,000, approval in principle in minutes, and personalised pricing made for you.
Find out more at avantcard.ie. Lending criteria, terms and conditions apply. Avantcard DAC Trading as Avantcard is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.